And one of the ways that we believe these dogs got here is, you know how I told you the Swiss farmers were very intelligent guys and they were very astute businessmen? If someone came up to you and said, I'll give you $5,000 for your dog, and they were overzealous American, you'd probably sell it to them. Not your dogs today, but if you just had a bunch of dogs on the farm that were kind of mutts, you'd say, sure, it's a St. Bernard, buy it. And, you know, not to say that the Swiss lied or anything, but this is what they did. I mean, my God, they had to make a living. So, you know, so that's how we believe some of the dogs got over here. Now, the common Coeur dogs became quite rare in the areas opened up to new railway traffic. Part of this is because people were buying them and bringing them to the U.S. and everything. They were essentially worthless, though, to the farmers. So this is one of the reasons why they were being sold, and they literally disappeared from the landscape amongst the early tourist routes. They lived in very inaccessible parts of the Swiss rural areas, continuing their duties as a multi-purpose farm dog. But they were continuing their duties as a farm dog. They were still being bred, and they weren't typically extinct. In many of the Swiss books, you'll hear that the Bernese Mountain Dog almost became extinct. And I have a very difficult time with this because as later I will tell you, probably in the 1910 dog show, there were about 110 entries of Bernese Mountain Dogs. And this is when they were a purebred. Does that sound like they were becoming extinct to you? Probably not. But, so now we're going to talk a little bit about Durbach. And for those of you who might be familiar with some of the breed history, the Bernese Mountain Dog used to be called a Durbachler. Part of the reason is because they came from Durbach. And Durbach was a very small community that you had to go through on the way to Schwarzenberg. It was not readily accessible until much later after the rise of the railway and roads, and it featured scattered single farmhouses where Coeur once moved from high to low country. The climate was extremely, extremely harsh there, and it still is, and the landscape was crisscrossed with deep cuts made by the rivers. During the 16th and 17th century, this was the area to which the beggars, mercenaries, peddlers, and traveling traders would be banished. And they lived in miserable huts and shelters, and they were forced to carve out a meager living by making and selling and trading baskets and tools. No purebred dog dealer would have even been caught dead in this area to sell high-quality dogs because there would really been no one to sell them to. They were kind of poor. However, the old tricolored farm dog survived because, as one witness recalls, he is being kept and cared for on all those remote farms. The farmers appreciate him as a strong cart-pulling dog with excellent qualities as a guardian and herder. These people who were poor were allotted acreage in the less accessible areas of the high-altitude valleys, and they found that the dogs could replace horses to pull carts, as we had discussed earlier, and they could travel through the lowlands and sell their wares, because they could not afford horses. So this is where sometimes you'll hear the term the poor man's workhorse was the dog. And incidentally, in some European countries today, it is actually illegal to hook a dog to a cart because there are many laws prohibiting this, believing that it is animal cruelty. Now, the harsh climate may have contributed to the preferences for long-haired dogs, as well as there was also a superstition back then, and you might even agree with this today, that the black-haired dogs kept away evil spirits. So there was that superstition that went on. And real quick, incidentally, when we talk about Durbach, this is Durbach, all of it. There's no buildings that are not in the picture. This is Durbach. So it consisted of probably about 5 buildings, and it was an extremely, extremely small city. The kind that if you drove through it, you blinked, you would miss it. So at the end of the 19th century, a small hamlet nestled in this area became closely linked to these dogs, and it was called Durbach. There was a St. Bernard breeder named Heinrich Schumacher who was responsible for a number of authentic reports about dogs in the country of Bern. And he had no knowledge of the Durbachler in 1860, but he described 2 dogs that he owned and later sold as a breed derived from a St. Bernard, an extraordinarily beautiful and big breed. One can only assume that these were Durbachler dogs, which later became the Bernese Mountain Dogs. Durbach itself only consisted of 3 to 4 houses, among them an inn, homestead, and horse stables. Some of the original dwellings are still standing while others have since burnt down, so we can imagine there's probably about 2 to 3 of the dwellings still standing. During the late 19th century, a sanatorium in Geringen became world famous because of its sulfur springs. After the opening of the Basel-Bern railway line in 1857, a regular coach run was established from Bern to the sanatorium that led through Durbach. Before the steep climb of the mountain, the horses were changed and guests were catered to at the inn. Anyone tending cows in those hills, making and trading dairy products or other goods, or engaged in game hunting in the surrounding area called inn at the Durbach Inn. At this inn, local farmers, the cooer, the timber workers, and the peddlers from the more remote valleys congregated with their dogs. The host of the inn was Peter Hoffman, and he grazed his cattle in the Alps and owned farm and herd dogs. History shows that Bernese butchers, the milk traders, merchants, and gardeners all acquired their valuable cart-pulling dogs from this inn and referred to them as the Durbach dogs. From Bern, the name Durbachler became the commonly accepted name for the dogs. And we will go to the next one. Now, eventually, after a failed attempt in 1889, a cynological organization called the Berner was founded, later on in 1899. A committee was formed to discuss matters relating to pedigree dog breeding. So this is where in Switzerland they first began to really focus on breeding the purebred dogs. In 1902, the Berner organized the Swiss Dog Show at Gaggenfeld, at which 320 dogs were present. At this dog show, there were 3 dogs to be seen. The mere exhibition of a dog did not automatically qualify a dog for entry into the pedigree register in Switzerland. So they are not listed, but we do believe that there were 3 dogs at this show that were proudly Bernese Mountain Dogs. Following the show, Adolf Tagmann, the editor of the Tiber Rose, which was a Swiss dog newspaper that also dealt with domestic livestock, published the article that's on the slide. And he says, even an experimental class was not missing from this show. This class was formed by the so-called Durbachler. This is a type of dog which plays about the same role in the county of Bern as the so-called Appenzell herd dogs do in the county of Alpenzell. The only difference is that they are bigger and long-coated. In color, they are black and tan, with tan and tan-colored dots above the eyes, as can be found on the German miniature pinscher. The Durbachler received their name from the hamlet Durbach in the county of Bern, where they are still being bred and regarded with the highest esteems in years gone by. If an energetic breeder decides to take this type of dog into his care and make the necessary fuss, which would be an essential requirement for publicity, the right to exist as a breed would be justified. This was the case with many a peculiar dog, which is today recognized as a pedigree dog. Now we talk a little bit about Fritz Prost. He lived from 1867 to 1945, and he was the owner of a coffee shop, and he was a dedicated huntsman. His initiative is regarded as a catalyst for the development of the BMD breed, previously unknown in many dog circles. He was very fond of animals and bred hunting dogs. For this reason, he joined the Berner and became familiar with all things concerning pedigree dogs. He encountered the Durbachler on his expeditions through the woods of the Gurengel and in the townships and saw them pulling carts. Since his childhood, the breed had been very close to his heart. In the Bernese circles, he found the necessary support to improve the dog, the Durbachler dog, and develop it into a purebred dog. Incidentally, this is one of my favorite pieces of art that I own. It's from 1834 and comes from the New Sporting magazine, and it was published in London. If we look at the dog, he doesn't have the greatest conformation, but he does have a lot of Berner traits, and you can't really see it in the slide, but in the piece of artwork that I have, you can even see some shading here that would fill in for where the ground was on the Bernese Mountain Dog. And of course, you know, I don't strongly believe that Berners were hunting dogs, but I do believe they do have some of the hunting instinct, as do most canines. So we do see a bird of some sort on the ground here, as if the dog was being used for hunting. And what's very interesting about this is later on you'll see in some of the photos that I have in my collection, there are a lot of dogs, for some reason, surrounded in hunting scenes. It's kind of interesting. Now, in 1904, there was a dog show that was highly successful. If I can get the slide to progress. Sorry about this, folks. We'll see. Gary, want a new job? Actually, I can probably do it myself too.
Can you straighten the screen so that it's not...
Yeah, I can try that.
Or just try opening and shutting the door a few times. Lovely.
Okay. Now at this 1904 dog show, encouraged by the successful dog show in 1902, the Berner people decided to organize a really big international dog show in Bern.